Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Crouch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
It would not be a 50 most relevant without him, let alone having him right near the top of the tree of my relevancy rankings. An absolute star basically since he marched into the AFL system, and yet there are some that are just brave enough to venture away from the Bont for big portions of the year. Is this the year to do it? Well, probably not, but we'll talk about that and a whole lot more on this episode of the 50 Most Relevant. Joining me is a man that is one of the many faces of the SuperCoach Insider podcast. Every single time I see this man, he has the premiership grin from ear to ear, as he should, representing yours and our Brisbane Lions. He's not mine, but that's totally fine. Ben from SuperCoach Insider. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hey, MJ, thanks for having us, mate. Really excited to talk about Bontempelli, everyone's favourite child. Super excited.
Absolutely is. Let's dive in to yet another fantasy football phenomenal season from him. A 126.4 in SuperCoach last year. Absolute outstanding season yet again. He's going to set you well and truly over the $680,000 price point. He is the most expensive player in that format. Well, in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, he's priced at $1.1 million in fantasy and just about 10K off it in Dream Team. Like, really? There's not much grace. If you want your hands on the Bont, you gotta fork out for it. A season high score last year in SuperCoach was against Collingwood. It was a 186. Well, he's just so close to being part of that 200 club, a 199 against the Crows back in 2020. 159 in that same season high score against the Magpies last year was his AFL fantasy high score of 159, which is also a career high score. Ben, if you've been playing SuperCoach for the last couple of years, you just know how phenomenal he is. And while the AFL fantasy community respect him and have long admired him, this is where his high skill, his high precision, winning the ball at critical moments and then using it well, there's just not a bad facet of this guy's game. Maybe his right leg is about as bad as he gets from a footballing end, because everything this man does just seems to turn to gold.
Oh, absolutely. And he almost stands up saying, who's with me? Like, come on with me, boys. I've got you. I also think he has another level to go. And we kind of saw a glimpse of that in 2023. You know, his kicks were up, his contested ball was up, his clearances, the tackles, all the things that scream AFL fantasy football as far as scoring. But SuperCoach, he's been doing it for the last 6 years. He's pretty much averaged 115 or more for the last 6. And the last couple of years as well, I mean, 126, 129. You just know what you're getting, and that's high impact, high scoring, VC premium scoring that just doesn't waver. His standard deviation is just so low that even when he has a bad game, he just brings it back up, and all of a sudden you think you're getting a discount and you still have to pay up an absolute fortune.
He just doesn't have a bad game. And if he does have a bad game, he'll almost level up the average the following week by more than making up for it. These are his seasonal ranks just over the last couple of years in AFL fantasy. Overall ranked 7th, 2, 23, 14, 17, and 13. That's not bad, but then you look at his SuperCoach ranks for points over the last couple of years. Back-to-back seasons, number 1, 11th, 5th, 8th, and 6th. Just absolutely incredible consistency. You throw in that durability that sits nice and strong for him. 14 tons last year in AFL Fantasy, 7 over 120, so a nice conversion of hundreds to captaincy territories, and a floor that doesn't hurt you with just the 2 scores under 80. While in SuperCoach, this 126, 20 tons, just wild when you think of it. We start getting excited about players in the teens amount of tons. 20 tons last year in SuperCoach, 13 over 120, 6 over 140, 4 over 150, 2 over 180 and just the 3 SuperCoach scores under 90 since the start of the 2022 season. And he's that good, Ben, in SuperCoach. He's ranked 140 points ahead of the guy that's second. So he's almost a clear full game ahead of anybody else in this format of the game.
Yep, he's someone that you love to have and someone that you hate to watch as a non-owner. And that's probably the best way we can lead into the his position here in the top 50, because it's just outstanding. And you said it, 89% of his games in the last 2 years, he's gone 100 or more. And then he's getting you 120 plus VC scores, captain scores 60% of the time, which means that, 60% or 6 games in every 10, he's easily getting you that VC, that 120 plus to help you level up. But otherwise, he's not going to hurt you as far as the really poor scores either, because it's only 11% of games that actually go under 100 SuperCoach.
And this new trend has emerged, and it may have just been a 2024 thing, but I'm keen on your take, is that teams have seemingly faded from tagging Bontempelli and started to go elsewhere. When Treloar was having an absolute hot season last year, teams were trying to shut down his run and carry. Ed Richards moved into the midfield. And gosh, even a Bailey Dale, teams were going to shut down. Why do you think teams are doing that? Because it does, from a pure SuperCoach and footballing sense, feels like it go against the grain of stop the opposition's best player. But have you got a thought behind why they're opting out of stopping or attempting to stop Bontempelli?
I think if you can put enough pressure around the ball, then if you kick it under pressure, that it's not going to be as effective. So you probably have 50-50 to maybe turn it over. But once the ball actually gets on the outside and it spreads, so you talk about the handball to the outside, your Richards, your Dales, with time and space ahead of forward centre, I think they found that it's a lot more damaging. And if they can kind of curtail that, then they're going to kick to more one-on-ones, a little bit slower and more predictable. And I think if there's one thing that teams like, it's predictable footy when it comes to being a defender and the ball coming in. But yeah, you spoke about it. I mean, Sydney completely disregarded Bont last year and went Richards twice, Dale once. Other teams as well, also Dale, Libba, Treloar. So you get to a point that even if you try and tag Bontempelli, I mean, Hewitt tried to go with him. He still scored 100 fantasy, 108 SuperCoach. The only ones to kind of actually try and focus and stay with Bontempelli seemingly seem to be Bedford and GWS. Otherwise, there's a lot of trends now with people running with those outlet players, your Dales. And if Richards is coming into that midfield as well, no one wants to get on the outside and let Richards run into the forward 50. And it seems like if he's been the person of target of late, then that would be a really interesting thing to watch to start this season.
There's some concern in the community because I'm good very quickly, and I know you can too, but very quickly we can run into the he's amazing, he's awesome, you've got to pick him, podcast episode done in under 10 minutes, happy days, everybody. But we start to try to build narrative and threads to talk ourselves out of a player of his capacity, because we are looking for elements of value when it comes in our starting squads. Our understanding of the game and how we can use it has really evolved in SuperCoach and Dream Team, because you've got extra trades, you've got trade boosts, you're able to take a greater risk profile. So where it was a lot more stable in how you would go about your starting squad, you didn't have a higher risk profile. But now with higher trade volume and with rolling lockout, away you go. Let alone now, we're basically having in Dream Team and SuperCoach our worst performing score fall out regardless of the week. While for AFL Fantasy, you've been doing 2 trades a week, use it or lose it. So the idea of turning players over, making money, it's much more commonality of approach through there. But when it comes to a player like Bontempelli, we start to build narrative, whether it's real or perceived is something I'm keen on your take, for reasons why we shouldn't spend the money to get Bontempelli. So we start to go, his market share with the likes of Treloar improving around it. Okay, that he did drop away in a couple of core stat lines last year. No Jamara Ugle-Hagan likely to start the year, and if he is, he'll be very underdone. He's going to have to go play a little bit more forward. Talk me through an ideology that's not flawed, if you can, for why you feel justified fading Bontempelli, especially in SuperCoach, where he's just rarefied air elite. Fantasy still very good, but not at the top, at least right now. Give me a good narrative, if you can, to go, this holds some water to fade Bontempelli as a starting squad option.
Well, it's funny because I actually went looking at the stats and I'm like, oh, Treloar's out. Let me look at Bont's average when Treloar's not playing. Now, Treloar the last few years probably has only missed maybe 6 games, I think it is, or 7 games without Bontempelli. So Treloar's missed, Bontempelli's played. And every single season that Bont's played, Treloar hasn't. Bont's averaged less. So I actually went looking for hey, let's look at the bump in increase in average. And then every time I looked at it for 3 years running, he averaged less when Treloar wasn't there. So I'm like, well, that's not good. Obviously, it doesn't hold much value. You talk about 1 game, 4 games, it doesn't make much. But the one thing I have seen a lot of people as far as fading Bontempelli is looking at draw-friendly starts. So there's a big onus on going Butters and going Brayshaw, going Sarong with the soft draw to start. And then people looking at the Dogs start and go, okay, the first 10 rounds maybe not as favorable as the last 10 rounds, because they do play a lot more career averaging friendly opposition in the back end. So just as a reminder, so SuperCoach, I think it's 5.5 points difference between the first 10 games compared to the last 10. So you might look at it and go, okay, he has a career history of not scoring as well against these 10 opponents. He has a really good draw on the back end of those 10 as far as a career history as well, plus the GWS tag. That's where it all kind of adds up to me. So people favoring Sarong, Butters, going, I'm only starting maybe 2 of these ultra premium expensive people. And maybe I'm going to run and play a Gorn or someone else as an expensive R2 and try and match Bontempelli that way. So there's so much value in the midfield that you are literally drawing hairs or trying to flip coins as to which premium you want to start. But also the further you go down that road, just know that it is that risk reward, and whatever choice you make, you're going to have to stand by it, because the one thing that we speak about as well is, yes, I can get him at any point, but you need the trades. What if you have other issues that week when he bottoms out? Do you want to have all these other things going against you possibly during the season? Because if you start someone like Bontempelli, he's durable, he barely misses games, he plays through injury, he's consistent, he's reliable. He's just one less person you have to worry about this season. He just ticks away, he does his job. Let me upgrade around him. Let me do everything else around him. And I've probably answered both sides of that story there. So look, you could pretty much flip it either way, MJ.
Yeah, it's so true. At some point in your SuperCoach season, if you don't have Marcus Bontempelli, injury is the only reason that it's not worth owning him. He's such a damaging player in every part of the ground. Now, in AFL Fantasy, it feels like we're a little bit cooler on him. I know SuperCoach Insider, as the podcast name, you clearly have a preferred platform and format that you talk about. But I suppose what AFL Fantasy has is a very flat baseline in the sense of what they do with the ball. They don't get punished or gain benefit from the volume of possessions. And I wouldn't say Bontempelli is an accumulator. That's much more the Treloar type of midfielder that sits there. But despite not being an accumulator that's always in the high 20-somethings of possessions week in, week out, he scores in every single column for us. He's not this one-dimensional guy that can only do one specific thing or slow in one specific thing. And I'm keen on your take here. We talk about trying to get players in at this value point, but history says in SuperCoach, it might be 20 to 30 grand, 50's probably at a stretch of how much money he'll lose. We know the magic number and the way the pricing works, that they must outperform their average at the start of the year when they're at this top end to be able to at least hold, let alone grow this salary that it's going to sit there. And so we try to start finding a way. How do I get to him? How do I get to him? But if he's only dropping in SuperCoach $50,000 by round 6 when you're trying to target it, you're still forking out $600K, let alone in AFL Fantasy. If he does anything like he did in 2023, where he was at 117, he's priced 10 points per game below what he did in 2024. And so my question is, how do we allocate our cash at the start of a season, because a player like Bontempelli feels like he breaks all the intuitive value rules, but he's such a low deviation scorer that from a bottoming out, it's so hard to find a way to justify ever paying up for him if you don't start him, because he never really gets quote unquote value all that often.
Love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's alive.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships at Bermudan and British Registry.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Yeah, and the big risk as well is, even as he starts to get lower in price, what we've seen previously is maybe a Dawson will have a really bad run and he'll be 100,000 cheaper. So then you kind of, do I want to burn the extra trade and the extra 100,000, or there's someone else with greater value during the season that presents earlier? And I know of a couple of people that were fading a few of the premium high-owned players. Then all of a sudden, a Dawson pops up, or a Clayton Oliver, who we thought was value at the time last year, pops up. And all of a sudden, or an injury, and then all of a sudden it's 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds go by, and then by that point, Bond's gone bang up over 700,000 again, that's the risk that you take. So it's about balancing out. For me, it's the durability, the consistency. Those who have high variance, high ceiling, yes, awesome. You want those, particularly in the best 18 rounds. High ceiling players are going to help really give you a boost in the season. However, the ones with the high ceilings might drop a lower game here or there, or a collection of games that are a little bit lower, and then you can actually pick them up at more value. So those who have a really high floor, a low standard deviation, so they don't fluctuate too much, regardless, you're having to pay. And I'd rather factor them in early, lose the 50, 60K, but sure, I'm getting value elsewhere, knowing that I'm going to get someone I don't have to worry about, someone who's a captain option. They play week in, week out. The only downside is the buy, obviously the first main buy, but you factor it in, you take risks elsewhere, and I'd rather do that now than burning extra trades to try and find the money later, because you don't know what's going to happen. And the best case I can probably relate it to, it's not a midfielder, but years gone by, you had Tex Walker was scoring huge and everyone's like, oh, let's get on him. He made a big price jump, but you have to jump off at the right time in order to make it valuable. And it's the same way. You don't know how that's going to end. You ride the fun while it's there, but you want to either get on or get off at the right time. And with a midfielder like Bontempelli, I think it's best to just start on, back him in. And as you said, there's points there to be had. 10 points under in fantasy as well. We had a look. He handballed more, 30 more handballs last year, 50 less kicks. I think he also had 42 less tackles, 20 less clearances. So if his CBAs go up in this preseason, he was at 75. He was 81%, I think, in 2023. If his CBAs go up at all in this preseason, then it's a really good indicator that he's going to accumulate more, and let's hope he kicks it more than handballs this year.
I think in AFL Fantasy, if you were sitting here listening, watching, whatever you're doing, checking out this episode of the 50 Most Relevant, and 12 months ago you were uber bullish on Marcus Bontempelli and AFL Fantasy, what have you lost in the last 12 months? What you have lost is you're not paying through the nose to get him on a career season. You're now paying for him much closer in the range of what he's been, where historically he has been the 105, the 103, the 107 sort of range. And so is 117 within his grasp? Absolutely it is. But you're now paying for his historical normative, not paying for the exception. Whereas now we've got 2 back-to-back seasons of north of 120 in SuperCoach. And I think you said, Ben, it's been like 2017, 2018 sort of territories where he's under 115, like just absolute extraordinary. And one of the things I've noticed is I've watched the community, built my own sides and kind of heard and observed the community narrative, is we do have a plethora of cash if we're really honest. Now, what we're doing in our rucks, and we've seen a lot of options fall over the last couple of weeks that now probably narrow us into a little bit of a similar elements of structure, is we did hear this from people going, I don't like any top-end forwards, so I'm probably not going to go for more than one, if any at all. I don't really like some of the top-end defenders, so I might just get the one that feels safe, if not at all. And then right throughout this 50 most relevant, we've talked at cascading levels, undeniable value at 20, 30, 40 points per game of upside that's not just projected, but proven over a long period of time. So we have just value just bleeding out of our teams. And then, as you've mentioned, we can find it cause justifiably to just go, I've got the cash. He feels like a safe C or VC almost every single week. And he's got the ceiling that's as good as anybody else across the formats to be able to sit there. And so if you're thinking, I'll just find a way to get to him and I'll upgrade that 600K. I'll jump off a couple of failed mid prices. I'll be fine. Can I just let you know, this is what he's done in his last 3 matchups, just against his first 4 teams. He plays North in round 1. Remember, that's such a critical structural round for you. His last 3 average in SuperCoach is 149.6, and it's a 133.6 in AFL Fantasy. The very next week, it's Collingwood in his last 3, 144 in SuperCoach and 130.6 in AFL Fantasy. In round 3, they play the Blues. Oh no, a 108.3. What a disaster after back-to-back 140s we're getting in SuperCoach, and a 104.6 in AFL Fantasy, while against Fremantle, a 126, basically what you're paying for in SuperCoach, and a 118 in AFL Fantasy. If he does that trend to start the year, Ben, kiss goodbye the chance to own him early. And so I find it really hard when we look at variable reasons to stack up to fade against Bontempelli or a player in the Bontempelli price range, whether it be the Butters, the Dacos, the others, whether we see those 2 names in the 50, we'll just have to wait and see. But it does feel really hard in SuperCoach especially to just go against a guy that's also got really high ownership sitting on his head.
Yeah, and the people that are fading will be hanging out for the GWS game, and then next minute they'll tag a runner. They'll go with a Richards or they'll go with a Dale, and you'll be like, no, this was my chance to get him after his bye, because he'll play a few games, they'll have the bye, I planned it all out perfectly, and the footy gods just do not care. I mean, I swear they've tweet that out every time something happens, the fantasy gods. But the other thing I'll say as well is that you speak about to be on as well with the scoring. I just think with Bontempelli, you spoke value as well. You're starting with so much value this year. Your Caleb Daniels, your Parkers, your Sanders, all these other people popping up. So not only do you have enough money to fork out on some really uber premiums, but I'm seeing people splash the cash on the bench, like, 150K on the bench in SuperCoach, or 300s in fantasy. Like, let's just spend more money on the bench, because there is still a lot of depth. There is still a lot of value. And this year, more than most, I feel, number one, the draftees, the quality of crop coming through is extraordinary by all reports. But also, those who've been biding their time in the systems for 2 years now, your Buslinger, Sheldrick, Nevitt, there's all these other players that are actually coming through, and Dan Curtin, that now look like they have a good role. Their bodies are better. They've been in the system for 12 months, 24 months, or etc. And they're also primed to actually get a best 22 role as well. So I think we are really blessed with super cheap options that have high output or a history of it, also great draftees, and also more mature rookies that are just waiting for their turn. So why wouldn't you spend on those who are going to be in the top sort of 8 in their line or 6 in their line, depending on the position, you might as well lock away the ones you know, because you've already got value. And then as the season presents, you're going to be looking for even more value that'll arise anyway. So start with what you know, upgrade around that, and I think you'll be in for a good time.
Their first game of the year, Saturday night game against the Dogs. Perfect VC or C option, depending what you got there. Then they play back-to-back Friday night games. Then they're the last game against the Dockers of the round for your safety C. Then that's that Saturday afternoon against the Lions. Sunday night, they've got the Saints, so a safety C. A Saturday night, safety VC. And that is what he is every single week against every single opponent in SuperCoach and Fantasy. When you desperately are trying to find captaincy options where you've got the limited amount in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the year, a central piece like Bont gives you a week in, week out option. And yes, you'll get sometimes the great matchups that might offer the greater ceiling. But at the start of the year, there are several things that can undermine your season's scoring projection. And while generating cash is of the most value, you still want to be getting some points on the board. And one of the things that can kill you the most is not getting that good variable options of captaincy options early in your side. Bont just gives you that go-to-sleep factor. He gives you the peace of mind. He enables you to take risks in other ways of your side. And in SuperCoach, I'll happily hear a conversation for how you're going to go against him. But to me, it's a high-risk play. Yes, you can make up the points with multiple mid-prices. Yes, you can make up the options in other spaces. But to me, all the variables stack up really high and heavy. That mean you're going to have to work to get him, because Bont is not someone you want to fade against in SuperCoach for the year. It's someone you want to get at the right time, and sometimes the right time is to start. While in AFL Fantasy, if you think he's around the normative of this 105 sort of range, yeah, you could probably afford to wait a couple of weeks. But as I've mentioned, there's a few early matchups that sit there during a time where we're in best 18 for many of those rounds. Man, if I could pop a C or a VC on one of those big weeks, yeah, I don't mind it. And with people fearing that he's not going to return to the 2023, I really like Bont as an option for us across the formats. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one other player I think that's capable in SuperCoach of dethroning him in the midfield. And he's right in the mix in AFL Fantasy for being the number one midfielder yet again for us in 2025. But Ben, on draft day, it all goes out the door because we don't get our hands on him for everyone. Just one person gets to own Marcus Bontempelli. So from a SuperCoach perspective, the coaches panel choose to draft on the Keeper platform. But if we were doing a SuperCoach draft, talk us through where would you be drafting him? I don't think... If you're not got an early pick, you ain't getting much of a look, though, are you?
No, you definitely want an early pick on this one. Also depends as well if you're running SuperCoach captains. So if there's no captains there, you might go, okay, second round, I might be able to get a Brayshaw or someone else, a Sarong maybe on the way back. So if it's not captains, you could easily go a Sheasel or someone that will give you more points in a different line and then come back and get value that way. Is a good strategy to go. Otherwise, yeah, most draft leagues run captains. Bontempelli pick number one. Absolute no-brainer. So not only do you want high score, high ceiling, high floor, it's going to be really consistent, plays most games, scores well most games. You're just banking those points in draft leagues, which goes a long way to winning you points. There's nothing worse as a SuperCoach draft owner and your captain will go 130 one week and 70 another. It can win you a week and kill you another, whereas Bont will just give you the best chance for success. But yeah, pick number one in SuperCoach. It's also depends, I guess, how many rucks, which is usually the big favor. So draft leagues, everyone jumps early on rucks. It depends on how many people are in your league. So if you're running maybe 8 to 10 in your league, rucks can kind of get pushed back a little bit. As soon as there's 18 or 14 to 18 teams and rucks will go so early, especially if there's a flex as well. I know my mates get hungry and take 2 rucks because they can. So rucks will go even earlier. So I could see maybe Cherry being pick number one in some draft leagues, particularly with the ruck focus. But if it's an 8 to 10 league, Bontempelli pick one, easy, every day.
Yeah, he's the first midfielder off the draft board in SuperCoach for me. Again, I know a Dacos and a Butters are really compelling options, but if you're picking a mid first and it's not Bontempelli, again, why are you taking risk so early on your draft when you just don't need to do that? While in AFL Fantasy, he's one of my top line options. Our Patreons have been given full access to my draft rankings, but he's an M1 across the format. He's got 110 capacity, and I just don't see a world where he dips under 100 in AFL Fantasy, and will definitely be gone in the first 2 rounds. Hey, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on for your Coaches Panel debut. We've had Swizz from the SuperCoach Insider, now you. Guess there's maybe one more person we should find a way to squeeze in. We'll see how we go. And feeling generous.
Forget Chris, MJ. I'll come back again, mate. Long time listener, first time on, big fan.
Great. All right. Sorry, Chris. You're out as spoken by the captain of SuperCoach Insider. Hey, mate, if people are just catching up with yourself and Swizz and what SuperCoach Insider does, maybe they don't play SuperCoach and they're like, oh, actually, the way he talks, it's kind of made me want to go check it out. Or maybe they're just expanding their content consumption in SuperCoach and have just stumbled across you through this episode. Where can people get in touch with you guys? And what have you got cooking for us this preseason?
Yeah, it's SC Insider 100 on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok as well. YouTube, just search SuperCoach Insider. Yes, we do have a SuperCoach focus, but realistically, when particularly in the season there, we really break down, role changes, what's actually happening, and pull apart the game. So I'm very much analytical, so I use a lot of data to kind of help support judgments. Chris sees the game really well as far as what teams are trying to do, how they're freeing things up, and structurally the kind of moves that they make. And then Swizz just brings together and actually ties it all together to make sense of the madness, which is why we kind of work really well together. So we kind of look at the games, pull it apart, and actually look at the pros and cons and what it means, what teams are doing, who's being freed up, and people that we're looking at. So particularly in the preseason, Swizz has just done an awesome job hooking up with content creators like yourself, MJ, and doing all the team-by-team series. We're about to just go positionally, so defense, forwards, midfields, etc. And then a lot of the work will probably start around now, pulling apart. Again, I wait for the data, so I'm kind of holding back. Once these unofficial games and the preseason games come through, it's roll, because that really dictates the scoring. So that's where I'll probably do my best work, and then Swizz will help make sense of it all. So, yeah, big season to come in the last, what do we got? Not long left?
No, about a month or so to go. That is for sure, depending on the time you're watching or listening to this. We put all the links for the SuperCoach Insider in the description of this episode. So if you're like, where are those places? What was the link? How do I check that out? All good. We got you. It's inside the description of this episode. While you're also there, you can gain access to the Coaches Panel social media to engage with us across the conversation, become part of our Patreon, get access to a whole bunch of different rewards, depending on the tier level you join in, and even get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. They've been just flying out the door. There is a special gift for every person that gets some merch this preseason. The only way to know what it is to purchase some. And let's just say I've been busier than I thought I would be with the gifts that have come your way. So if you'd like to know what that is, just get your hands on some merch and you'll get some of that. Hey, I've got a clue for you about who's at number 7. Hang tight and we'll tell you who it is. But if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, make sure you do so. Comment below. Let us know. What do you think the Bont is going to average this year? And are you brave enough in SuperCoach especially to go against him in round 1? And if so, love to know why. If you haven't subscribed, wherever you're listening to this as an audio podcast or given it a 5-star rating, help a brother out. It takes 2 seconds, but makes a huge impact for us here at the Coaches Panel and helps others find and discover when they're looking for fantasy football content. Are you ready to go for the next player, number 7? Here's a clue for you. He's underrated in the AFL fantasy community. Like, criminally underrated. When we talk about premiums in the line that this player's available, we've just glossed over him. Even in SuperCoach, when we start thinking about spending up big, we feel okay to do it for Bont. But then this player, we go, mate, yeah, maybe it was just a career high. Oh, maybe he's got some other young stars coming through the team and maybe his market share will fall away. And we talk ourselves out of a guy that career trajectory is going up, up, and up. And given where he's priced at, it's hard to say there's much more upside. But when you look into the numbers, this guy could hit unbelievable heights. He could be the best player across the formats for us next year. Who am I talking about? You only got to wait 24 hours, and I'll tell you on the 50 most relevant.